Hello, everyone, and welcome back to DVD Clutter. I'm your host, Maddie, and I'm joined by
Heather.
And today we have something a little bit special. Pride Month is right over the horizon, and there is a new season of the Vampire Chronicles show on AMC coming out, so we thought we'd revisit an old favorite of ours and our mutual love for the vampire Lestat. We are talking about the Neil Jordan film Interview with the Vampire.
I haven't been human for 200 years.
From the novel by Anne Rice. From Neil Jordan, the director of The Crying Game.
I've come to answer your prayers. Life has no meaning anymore, does it?
His name is Lestat.
I'm curious to know what your relationship is with the film and how it came into our DVD collection, and also, for those who don't know, what is Interview with the Vampire?
Well, Interview with the Vampire is the story of Louis, who is a slave owner. It's the very late 1700s when this takes place. He is kind of stalked by a vampire named Lestat, who very quickly kind of gets Louis under his spell and turns him into a vampire. And the story is primarily the story of the relationship between Louis, Lestat, and their vampire child, Claudia. And it's all set within this framework of Louis telling his story to a young reporter. So he's talking about being a vampire and telling this whole journey of him and Lestat and how he got to be where he is. And that is the interview portion of Interview with the Vampire. That's where we get the interview part from. But my relationship to this is, I started loving vampires with the gateway drug for most of my generation, which was Twilight. And
so you were kind of a late bloomer then.
I was kind of a late bloomer when it came to vampires. I, was very into Twilight, and after that series ended, I needed more vampires. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go, read the best of them all. I'm going to go read Interview with the Vampire. So I was actually in college when I first read the novel. And then I watched the movie after that. So I was, I would say probably 21 the first time I actually encountered this movie. And I absolutely loved the movie from the first time I saw it. I loved the movie way more than I loved the novel. And in preparation for this, I actually went back and read Interview with the Vampire. And I feel the same way, actually, after watching this. Yeah. I really love the movie. I am just in love with the characters. I love the setting. I just love everything about, about this movie. And I sure love Lestat.
What is the appeal of Lestat? Because, obviously, we're having this conversation in the context of, this series coming out. We were trying to get tickets to, there's going to be the big concert in New York, and we'll see if, if the ancient Queen Akasha shows up and starts killing everybody. But I feel like there is some sort of magnetism that this character has, and I kind of want to know, your take on what's the appeal there? What is that?
I think for me, and this is something that I really love in my vampire stories, is that Lestat approaches being a vampire just with reckless abandon. He truly loves it. He relishes it. And, I feel like there's just something kind of magnetic about living in a way where there just are no real consequences. And I think that's something that's really appealing about vampire stories in general. And, he just plays off of Louis so well because Louis is in such a moral conundrum throughout this entire thing. And Lestat is not. Lestat's not. And he's also really sexy. Lestat is just oozing sex appeal. And everyone who, encounters him just falls instantly for this guy. There's just something about him that is so intriguing. What is it for you about Lestat?
So I think for me, a lot of it is the fact that, and I guess this kind of applies to the novel especially, because I didn't really realize until very recently, and I mean the past few months rereading it after we watched, we binged the show and we're now binging it again. I didn't really appreciate just how much of modern vampire lore comes from that Anne Rice novel, that there was not really story told prior to that from the vampire perspective about vampires wrestling with immortality. And I think that what I really sort of connect to about Lestat is that he's so human.
Yeah.
Compared to, all of these other versions that we've seen. There's Dracula, there's, Nosferatu, you've got I Am Legend, which is a very different view of vampires, or Carmilla. It's always like the vampires are these just agents of evil, or again, in I Am Legend, it becomes a little bit more complicated than that. But it's always like they are just their threat. They are a threat to your purity and your soul and your lives and your blood. And I like that this one is like they're vampires and they're wrestling with all the same things. And in the case of Lestat, he is such a mess. He is such an emotional wreck. He cannot stop himself from being cruel, from being negative, from just being like manipulative and just treating everyone around him terribly. But you kind of understand it's because it's coming from a place of pain. And it's coming from a place of, I'm stuck here on this planet that keeps dying around me, and I need to drag somebody into this hell with me.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think this is probably the first time where we're encountering vampires who are having relationships with each other, who are having emotional connections of sorts to each other, and they're existing in their own sort of vampire world, in a way that we haven't seen before. They're actually having to exist over centuries. You get like the character of Armand here, who is 400 years old in this movie. And the things that he has seen, you just think about living for that long and the implications of that. What does that mean when everything around you, the world you've known, keeps on changing and you just stay the same?
And I think that what the books in particular do a very good job, and this film does a good job, and I don't think the AMC series does a good job, it's really communicating that. Kind of the idea that the world around you, everything, your whole moral foundation falls apart over time. I've read the first 3 books. I know you're in the middle of the second one. And it's kind of a running theme of like, you start to encounter older and older vampires like Armand, like the vampires who made Armand and the vampires who made them, all the way back to the source. And all of these vampires, they were human and raised into particular dogmas. They outlive those beliefs. They're sort of stuck because they have to keep existing. They don't get to just die with the times the way that you and I will.
Right. And I think also you have the character of Claudia, who's brought in as, in the novel, she's just 5 years old. In this particular iteration, she's 10. And I know in the AMC show, she is supposed to be 14. So kind of different iterations picking up, different times when she was turned. But in this one, I think it works really well because at 10 years old, she's still a child, but then we see her really coming into adulthood, but her body stays the same and she will always look like a 10-year-old, even though she has lived, so many years, with Louis and Lestat at a certain point. And it's really, really sad to me, actually. I think Claudia, for me, is one of the saddest characters in the series because she's just sort of dragged into this situation and she really has no knowledge of what that's going to mean for her, 20, 50 years down the road.
And she gets no choice in it either.
She has no choice. And nobody really explains this to her. And she is, constantly treated like a child by Louis and Lestat. And when she does try to assert herself, it's sort of like, you don't know what's good for you. You don't understand.
Yeah.
Even though she's trying to understand. She's trying to become an adult, but she just can't.
Well, and this is not a case of Let the Right One In, where it's like the characters are kind of emotionally frozen in the age that they were when they were alive. We really see Claudia as an adult as the film goes on, as she starts to
Yeah.
realize, like, oh, you're still buying me dolls. I'm decades old now, and this is not who I am anymore.
Yeah.
And what struck me so much is we think of like the AMC show, and that's like pure like soap opera drama, just like who's fucking who. In the books, they can't even fuck.
Yeah.
But in this film, and I think more so in the books, there's a lot more emphasis put on it as a horror film. And I think one of the scariest things, because I encountered the film first, probably not too many years after it came out. I either rented it or saw it on TV. And I would have been maybe early high school, late middle school, around 13, 14, 15, when I first listened to the audiobook. It was the first audiobook I ever listened to, and it was narrated by F. Murray Abraham.
Oh, nice.
Who had a very strange voice for Claudia that was very, very soft and very, very... Like he really tried to, like, get the little girl voice, but he was still great. And I think that's one of the elements that really scared the hell out of me, was just imagining what that would be like, what it would be like to grow up and still be trapped and still be so dependent in a child's body.
Yeah. And props to Kirsten Dunst too in this role, because
incredible.
She does an amazing job from going from child to teen to woman, and you can really sort of see that she's playing the character differently as the movie progresses. And for me, when Claudia dies, this, it gets me in this movie. It really does. I feel that. I feel the weight of her death on Louis, and I feel how sad it is for her that she's just about to sort of try to go off on her own, which even that is kind of strange, because Madeline, who, becomes her companion vampire, is really just like, I want to be her companion because my daughter died, and now Claudia can be my permanent daughter, and again, she's trapped in this body that I don't think Louis or Lestat really can understand, because they are at least grown adults when they were turned. So, it doesn't really matter. They can sort of like go anywhere, do anything, and they're going to be considered an adult. And for her, she's just always seen as a child, and it's just so upsetting. I find it.
It's so interesting too, the nature, and this is in the books as well, how much the vampires sort of cling to the new vampires that they make. They start off like, I'm gonna teach you, you're gonna be my pupil, and I'm gonna take care of you, and then they just kind of like, they kind of suck the lives out of their like suck the souls out of the people that they're siring as we get throughout the series. And certainly I think this is the case. There's a lot of sexual taboos going on, like obviously, this film is really gay. Like this film is super gay. The books are super gay. The new show is like, they finally made it explicit, but like, who were you kidding? These were obviously gay characters to begin with, but when you introduce the idea of Claudia, I mean, like, in the film, they don't really get into kind of how fraught that relationship is, to say the least. And as the books go on, and I don't think you're even there yet, there are some other pretty big taboos that come up.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. I think this movie gets into the thing with Claudia here is like, she's, she sleeps with Louis in his coffin, and then eventually she wants her own coffin, but sometimes she also goes back into Louis's coffin. Like, I don't know that is an explicit, I don't think that's anything.
I don't think it is in the film. I think it's more so in the book.
In the book, there is a lot of very strange stuff between Claudia and Louis.
And Lestat.
I mean, and also this carries over in the show too. Lestat makes some very inappropriate and lewd comments sort of about Claudia and her body, just making her feel really terrible that she will never be a woman and she will never have a desirable body, and just kind of like all of these really inappropriate things.
I feel like it's becoming a running thing where, like, anytime there's an element like that, I'm like, I point at it and I say, that's trans, and I'm like, it is, and that's probably why I connected it when I was younger. But that is an element that becomes a little bit more explicitly trans as you get into the second book. There's elements of, the fact that like you cut your hair and it grows back right away, and you can't alter that.
Yeah.
And it becomes a source of canonical dysphoria for one of the characters.
Mm-hmm. And I think it was in this movie, it's kind of horrifying too, because, she feels like, I'm taking agency, I'm cutting my hair off, and 2 seconds later it grows back, and she's just horrified by it. And she's saying, why? Why is this happening to me? And nobody has an answer for her other than this is just what happens. You are stuck where you are.
Yeah. I would say that this is largely a very faithful adaptation. I think there are a few differences as we get close to the end, and they cut out a little bit of the middle section from the book. And the AMC show took a lot of liberties, but they did so sort of like with a wink of like, hey, we're updating the story because a lot of this doesn't really work. So we're going to sort of revisit it with a critical eye. And you, as people who are obviously very familiar with the source material, are going to recognize what we're doing. And we're going to be making this for you as readers. So one of obviously the biggest change is the setting and the race of the character of Louis, where they change him from being a slave-owning white Louisianan, from for Creole, to being a late 1800s pimp who is black. So they kind of preserve a little bit of the idea that Louis is an oppressor in some ways, that he's exploiting people, and that he's not as savory as his guilt would sort of have you believe, but he's also not doing anything as terrible as slave owning. And I was wondering, how did that play to you this time around?
I prefer the AMC adaptation in terms of Louis' character, because I feel that it really gets to grapple with a lot of different things that are kind of underlying, but also you can never really get to, I think, really interesting things with Louis because of the limitations to his character. I feel like in the movie, he is kind of he is a little annoying because he is ultimately just a whiny white guy who's like, oh, boo, I burned my fancy house down and sent all my slaves away and my wife died, blah, blah.
A release from the pain of living.
Oh, Louis.
Is open to anyone.
Still whining, Louis. Have you heard enough?
But it was
I've had to listen to that for centuries.
Yes, we're grappling with these big themes of immortality, but I think in the show you're getting into these really, really difficult, like, nuanced themes with race, and even like his relationship with Lestat, because Lestat is a white guy. There's so much there, and I don't think that the movie, or really the book, because that the character of Louis in the book is more faithful to, this movie is like the faithful adaptation of it. But I find the show to be a lot more compelling. I also really don't care for Brad Pitt's performance, honestly.
I wasn't expecting to hate his performance, and I was into it. I was drawn into that performance. I thought it was effective. I thought that, he got across sort of the kind of gravitas of like I'm super powerful and I don't care, and also just the regrets that he had, and like the forlornness. But with regard to the racial politics, I kind of felt like the book did an okay job. I felt like the film kind of missed the mark, and there was one scene in particular that just had me cringing so hard, and it was the scene where like his servant is coming to Louis and like almost like romantically, like saying like you're changing and I'm worried about you. And it's like in the book, none of the slaves care. They're like, this is this is the slave master. We hate his guts. And the fact that he's a vampire doesn't actually change anything for us. Yeah. It just means that our chances of survival just like went down even more than they already were.
Yeah, and that scene, I was also thinking about that. I was like, first of all, this is not I don't feel this is plausible at all. I don't know what his relationship to this person is, because she does also make a comment about like him not coming to the slave quarters anymore. So I'm like, I don't know if this was like a lover of his or what, but regardless, I feel like, you know, I can't sympathize with Louis in that. I think it's trying to like garner sympathy for him.
Yeah.
Where, you know, he's still a slave owner.
And I think in some ways she's supposed to be like the audience surrogate in that moment, but it's like, it's sort of showing, you know, just how little the creators of it really paid attention to this stuff at the time.
I have to say, something I really did like about the book was a lot of the scenes where, you know, Lestat is sort of taking over at Louis's house, and the slaves are all like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, they are slowly, there's that
they keep having dinner with empty plates.
Yeah, there's that line in the book too where I'm like, it just creeps me out so much, because I can imagine people just watching them through the window being like, what is going on here?
And I think the book even makes a point that like the slaves are onto them like way before any of the white people ever would have been, because they're more like, because they haven't had like the benefits of like modernity, so they've clung on to sort of that culture more. It's a lot more thoughtful. Whether it's thoughtful enough, I think that's for somebody else to say. Yeah. But you know, I really was kind of hoping that this time I would be able to sort of look at the film and say, you know, this actually does work, and I can't really say that.
No, and especially after watching the AMC show, because I feel like, first of all, New Orleans has such a rich cultural African-American history, and to bring that into the show was such a brilliant thing for the writers to do of that adaptation, because it brings such a whole new, you know, aspect and nuance to the setting, to everything, you know, to the character of Louis, and to what it means to him to, you know, to be changed, and also like what it means for his family. And there's just so much more going on there that I think the movie just can't, you know, it can't touch on that.
I also think that the show does visually a much better job of making the locations, you know, sort of culturally present. And I think, you know, like New Orleans, you actually get to see New Orleans. You get to see, you know, you kind of understand the geography of it a little bit more, whereas New Orleans in the show just looks like a soundstage. Paris just looks like a soundstage. They're good sound stages. They're creepy as hell. I just don't think it's really interested in these settings in the same way. But it is interested in the passage of time, I think, maybe more than the show, where the time is a little bit more condensed, because they changed Louis' arc to happen much later.
Right.
So he's not hundreds of years old by the time he gets to Paris.
Right. Well, we've talked about sort of the racism, and I wanted to also sort of talk about the subtext of the queerness of the characters, and to kind of also bring this back to what
barely
I love.
Subtext, just
yeah. Well, you know, I think there's, in the different iterations, there's sort of different, you know, ways in which it's, you know, it's shown. And I think that another reason why I love Lestat so much is because he is a queer character who just does not make a big deal about his queerness. He is just the way he is. He likes everyone. You know, and it's
non-discriminating.
Like, he's non-discriminating. It's a very queer movie, but it's not overtly queer. Whereas in the show, it is, you know, it's explicitly clear that they're queer.
I'm always interested, and I think that my understanding is Anne Rice was totally in on the queerness of everything. And honestly, I would be shocked if Neil Jordan wasn't, when you consider, you know, this is the director of The Crying Game and Breakfast on Pluto. This is somebody who has a rich history of making films about trans people that trans people are not involved in. You know, when it comes to Lestat and his queerness, like in the original book and in this film, I feel like it sort of takes a kind of historical look at it, where a lot of things that we assume now to be queer weren't considered so back then. You could kiss your guy friends on the mouth if you were a guy, and you would say I love you and write poetry to each other, and as long as nobody caught you having sex, you were just good friends. That you were roommates, you know, you were best friends.
Right.
And I think that this film kind of embodies that kind of ambiguity when we look at a lot of history. You know, these different sort of historical contexts, we can understand these relationships differently. And in particular, when it comes to the Anne Rice vampires, they kind of play them all at once because they don't have the sort of sexuality, except in the AMC show, of what we would understand because they can't fuck.
Right. Is it a problem for you in the book or the film adaptation that it is not so explicitly queer, or does that not really bother you?
No, that doesn't bother me. First of all, because I think that it's about the relationships as they exist in this world. You know, I don't think that Anne Rice is obligated to make these characters as explicitly queer as possible. And I think it's okay, like, certainly as the series goes on, it's very clear that these characters are queer, they're polyamorous, they latch on emotionally to others of themselves in that way.
Yeah.
And I think that is the more powerful thing. I don't need to see Louis sneaking into Lestat's coffin.
As much as I love to see it on
and
the show.
I don't need yes. It's entertaining, but I'm also like, I don't feel like it's necessarily adding to my understanding and appreciation of the characters, and I don't feel more seen when I see Lestat floating and Louis is hanging off of his boner in his ass, which is a scene in the show. It's great, but it's also like, it's almost a gag at that point, and I don't think that it's necessary. Like I love it, but it's not necessary.
Yes, and I think one thing that I think is so beautiful about a lot of vampire stories and this is something that Anne Rice has created, is this idea of this like beautiful companionship between all kinds of people, like regardless of gender and all these sort of different things. And I think that's just one of the reasons why this story is kind of so enduring and interesting. I also sort of find it, it's interesting too, like this kind of idea of found family and chosen family in the book, because that's a big thing. Whereas,
huge.
They are creating, Louis and Lestat are creating their own little family with Claudia. And it's like, it's toxic as fuck, because Lestat is like, I made this, I made Claudia so that you wouldn't leave me, Louis. It's really messed up, but also sort of playing with a lot of these traditional ideas of what we think about relationships and staying together for the kids and like all this other stuff, and then throwing it on its head. And
the way that so many adults can't conceive of their kids actually growing up.
Yeah.
That to them, they're always the little girl that needs a doll every year. Oh, but you used to love that.
And in this world, it's like you can craft each of these people. You can craft your companion and your daughter to be exactly who you want them to be in a sense, until they get the taste of their own, sort of freedom, and that, there are others like them out there, and there is more of a world out there. And I think that's just something that's really interesting that's explored in this, as Louis and Claudia, leave New Orleans and travel all over the world in search of vampires like them. I just think it's just, it's something really cool that's explored.
Another thing relating to the setting is the fact that Tom Cruise as Lestat does not have an accent.
No.
And I know that, I know Sam Reed is not actually French, but he's bringing into that role sort of a sense of a lived history of this character, of this person who's an immigrant, who's lived a totally different life, and we get that whole history. And I feel like that is something that is missing from the Tom Cruise performance. And I guess sort of in a broader question, we talked about Kirsten Dunst, we talked about Brad Pitt. What did you think of Tom Cruise's performance as Lestat?
I do think his performance is kind of lovable, and it's got all of the bones of the stuff, about Lestat that you love. I think that, I was wondering what I was going to think, because after watching the show, I'm like, Sam Reed is the definitive Lestat, which I still kind of feel, but I also feel like part of that is because we get so much more Lestat in the show, and I do really love his accent. I think that it adds so much to his character too. But I actually think the Tom Cruise performance holds up. He's having a blast playing this character, and he does a really great job whenever he shows up.
I think that Sam Reed's performance as Lestat is one of my favorite performances in any medium.
Yeah.
I think he's so good. That said, it's not subtle. Mm-hmm. He is broadcasting what that character is thinking and what he's going through. And I actually kind of feel like Tom Cruise, what we're seeing is the toxic behavior. Mm-hmm. And he's trying not to show you the vulnerability underneath. Right. And I think, to me, that's something that I do kind of appreciate. That's a method that I like a lot. And it's something that I think, somewhere between the movie and the show is kind of like my ideal version of what Lestat is and could be.
Yeah, it's funny because as I'm watching the movie, Lestat is supposedly killed off, maybe about halfway through the movie. But then you go to Paris and you get the other vampires who kill Claudia, and they entomb Louis, and he has the whole thing with Armand. And it's like, when you finally come back to Lestat, you almost feel like relief, because you're like, this is the devil we know, Yeah. It's like, thank God Lestat's back. You keep waiting for him to sort of show up and save the day in a way. And I think the movie kind of comes full circle when you finally come back. And you do see him sort of in a weakened state when Louis finally returns to New Orleans. And then you get that final just really satisfying scene at the end, in my opinion, where he's driving the car away.
It's so good.
It's,
But I also hate it now because I've read the third book, and put me on as Team Devil's Minion. We were robbed. We could have had a movie that featured Antonio Banderas and Christian Slater in a much more explicit romantic relationship that is so much more toxic than Lestat and Louis. And it would have been glorious. It is my favorite in the book series. It's my favorite part of the book series. Yeah. And we didn't get that. And it's because they had to end it with a cliffhanger of Lestat is back, get ready, and now we're listening to the rock music, so sort of hinting at what's coming next, and we never got any of it.
I was wondering if maybe they were planning on making a series of these movies, because, they're kind of, it's billed as the Vampire Chronicles, Interview with the Vampire.
I mean, we did get a Queen of the Damned movie eventually.
But we didn't really get, the whole...
It's a different franchise, though. It's a different series. It's has no connection to this one.
Yeah. Also, just really quickly wanted to touch on what you thought of Antonio Banderas as Armand.
I liked him. I thought he was effective. I liked him. I liked I don't remember the actor's name,
Stephen Ray Santiago.
No. Oh, okay. In the show, I like the guy that plays Armand. He's maybe. He strikes me as a little bit old for the character based on the books, but he's effective. He has that presence,
Yeah.
He feels so sort of. Again, the film's focus is so much on how the passage of time is experienced by these vampires, and I think he does such a good job of embodying that as, to his knowledge, the world's oldest living vampire.
Right. And something I was kind of worried about watching the movie was, is this going to feel like, a rushed version of Interview with the Vampire? Because after watching the show, which is, spread out over 2 seasons, but no, I actually feel like it's still an effective movie, and it's still got all of the beats. It's just a different thing than the show.
Yeah, they did a good job. They cut out all the stuff that would have been difficult to include. Yeah. All the stuff like having Lestat bring his dad to the plantation, and I think the one thing that they sort of truncated that I think doesn't totally work is the fact that Louis refuses Armand's proposal at the end, that he doesn't go with Armand. Right. And I think that it's sort of, it felt like they were trying to preserve Louis as the hero protagonist, that he's the one with the soul, and that he's you know, that he has to experience his regret and learn a thing. And it's like the book is very much the opposite of that. It's like, no, he's putty in Armand's hands at that point. He's been so broken down. And then, you know, basically he and Armand only break it off after Louis encounters Lestat again.
Yeah, because Lestat is the daddy of this movie. But anyway, he's the daddy of the series.
Literally.
Well, I mean, he is really the overarching character of the entire Vampire Chronicles series.
Definitely,
I mean, it really is his, you know.
He's the prince.
Yeah, of course, you encounter all these other vampires, but his story is the overarching story, and I think he's like the through line, you know, through most of the books. So, you know, but yeah, overall, I think this movie really holds up. I had a great time watching it. I wish our DVD was...
Yes, this was the first time, and I was wondering when it would happen that we were not able to finish a DVD. We had to stream the remainder of it. So rather than declutter or keep, my question to you is declutter or replace?
I say replace, get the Blu-ray, get the special edition, whatever. You know, this is one that we're going to keep. We're clearly not getting rid of it. We love the Vampire Chronicles. You know, we're going to be rewatching this one, you know, tons, I'm sure, in the future. So absolutely keep.
I feel the same way. Again, I feel like all of the things that I was primed to sort of... you know, to come away from and being like, oh, no, it doesn't hold up. Most of them, with a couple of caveats, most of them held up so well. And I was so glad to return to this. You know, this was such a foundational piece of literary history, certainly, but also like just a big part of my childhood. Yeah. You know, my teenage and preteen years was... You know, a lot of it, I was really into this book and this film, and I didn't even really consider much of the extended series. I had seen Queen of the Damned.
Yeah.
But never read any of the other books, and I was like, why would I? It's perfect. And I have the answer, and it's The Devil's Minion. Yeah,
I mean, I'm diving into the series now and just kind of loving the second book so far and really enjoying getting a little bit further in, you know, with the stories and in the world of the Vampire Chronicles. So, yeah, it's exciting. I think there's a lot of stuff to sort of mine from this series, from all of the iterations of it. And yeah, this is a great, you know, adaptation, in my opinion.
And I guess that leads us to the final question, which is what is in store for us next time around?
Well, you know, summer is here, and I'm just kind of thinking a lot about like lazy afternoons, maybe drinking a glass of wine. So with that said, we are going to revisit the 2004 film directed by Alexander Payne, starring Paul Giamatti, and that film is Sideways.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that one. That's going to be a very interesting one to revisit, yes. And I'm sure that we'll both have a lot to say about it.
For sure. So until next time, we will be back with another episode soon of
DVD Clutter.
Take her, Louis. End her suffering and yours. But do not doubt, you are a killer.
I want some more.
Interview with the Vampire.